Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the organizers of this event, I cordially welcome all of you. All those here in the room and also those online. We have two streams. One is via Zoom, one is YouTube. And for those on YouTube, you also on Zoom, you will also have translation into Arabic. Unfortunately, we cannot take questions from those who are there only virtually because of technical reasons, but we can only take questions here from the room. But we are very happy that it worked out, that many more people can attend today. My name is Marina Peter. I always say I'm a veteran on Sudan, as you can also see, of course, from my face. It's nearly 40 years that I have been privileged to work with the people of Sudan and South Sudan, and I'm very grateful that I can still be here. But the reason, of course, that brings us together is a very sad and bad one. Before I come to that, I would like to name the co-hosts of this event, which, of course, you can also read here. It's the Heinrich Böll Foundation, it's Amnesty International, the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, known to many as FES, the South Sudan and Sudan Forum, which is also represented by myself, the Borderline Europe, and last but not least, the German Africa Foundation. And I know there are many, many important people in the room today, but I would really like to single out one, and this is the chair of the Africa Foundation, the president of the Africa Foundation, which is Dr. Uschi Eid. She is with us here today, and we are very happy because she also has such a long history with the Horn of Africa. Thank you very much for coming. We also have the German Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa with us, Heiko Nitschke, so very warm welcome. And of course, I only singled out two, but you all know that you are all very dear to us and we are all equal in this room. I have to give some rules, let's say. Unfortunately, as you know, there is a lot of what shall I say, hate speech in the internet. There are many people who are not happy with what is happening the whole week here in Berlin, and especially with the conference on the 15th. And that is the reason why, for the first time in such an event here, we have both security people here who would kindly ask anybody to out who starts intimidating other people or with hate speech or with anything else. And we also would like to kindly ask you not to take photos, not to take videos, not to record this event other than those who are assigned to do it. I think you all know the reasons why. It's very unfortunate. We wished it would be different, but this is unfortunately the reality. So what brings us together? As I said already, and you know it yourself, we are 3 years into the nationwide war. I always like to not to call it the war in Sudan, because there had been so many wars in Sudan ongoing, in Darfur, in the Nuba Mountains, in Blue Nile, with South Sudan, of course. And this is the biggest tragedy now, the 3 years of the Sudan nationwide war. You all know there has been so many victims, and all the Sudanese, and that I can assure you of, sitting in these rooms, they are all affected as well. They are traumatized like everybody else. They don't know what happened to their loved ones. We met here in this room in September last year, and that was before El Fasher. And El Fasher was, I always say, it's like the chronicle of an announced death, because we all knew that something terrible would happen in Darfur, in El Fasher, and basically the whole world was watching. So it was awful. Everybody was in shock. For a short time, there was more media coverage on Sudan, and then it vanished again because of all these terrible many other events. But as we speak, as again most of you know, of course, the situation in Darfur is far from being better, and especially the people in the two Kordofans are suffering tremendously, are under siege and are under drone attacks as we speak. And you also know, of course, that women and children are particularly also falling victims. I would like to thank all the journalists here in the room, because you are the ones who have been constantly reporting. Many don't. We always complain media attention is not there, but those of you who are here in the room, particularly Arne Perras and also Andrea Böhm, of course, and Radio Dabanga and others from the Sudanese side here, they have been constantly reporting. Thank you very much for that, in the name of all of us. This afternoon is a bit like having three parts. So we start with a presentation by our dear friend Ahmed Koduda on the path to peace. This will be a short PowerPoint presentation. We had foreseen also to have a second presentation on the paper worked out by another network, Manassi, and they have a very wonderful paper on the way to the humanitarian truce and the road to peace. Unfortunately, although we tried very hard to have one of the representatives here to present himself, for completely reasons, what do we always call it, beyond our control, it was not possible. So we are very sorry for that. It would have been an enrichment, of course, also to have them here. Also three other people who should be with us, Mohamed Tahir, Asma El Naim, and Isam Abbas. You saw them possibly in the first program. They were not able to make it, either due to visa reasons or because some of them have been in the conference in Addis, which just ended last night. And this is, of course, also the other thing which I have to briefly touch upon. You know that this week there is a big international conference on Sudan in the Foreign Office, and it has three parts. One is the Ministerial Conference, another one is what many people call Civil Conference, and another one is the humanitarian part. And there has been a lot of myth around it, a lot of complaints already that people say, oh, it's not transparent, we don't know what will happen there. We will discuss this possibly later if there could be some improvement also on that side, but at least from our side we can say that the cooperation with the Foreign Office in particular and their offer to also do a debrief with the special envoy for the Horn of Africa for the diaspora here in Germany. We very much appreciate that, and many other things as well. We all, those represented here, we are also part of a wider network of 30 organizations here in Germany, an advocacy network on Sudan, and there will be many more events like this during the week, starting with one at the Kulturbrauerei tonight. It's a movie, Sudan Remember Us, and the Secretary of State of the Foreign Office, she will also be there, so it's a direct follow-up basically of this conference here. Unfortunately, it's completely sold out, but there is another opportunity at least to watch the movie on the evening of April 15. Let me briefly see whether I forgot anything. I think this is basically what I was supposed to say in the beginning. Maybe on the purpose of this conference, we all feel that the voices of the Sudanese themselves are not enough represented in media, in the conference itself, and in many other events. And you might see that I have this here on my arm, and it's called Centering Sudanese Voices. I got it at the Diaspora Conference last Saturday, and there again I felt how much our worlds are apart, because we were only three even from our network to be there, and most of the others were all Sudanese. So I invite all of us also already now to link up with people here in Germany from the Sudanese diaspora and work with them. Thank you. Now I ask Ahmed on stage. Ahmed Koduda, I guess many of you know him also from interviews or from his writing. And Ahmed Koduda is, again, a dear friend. I think I can say that. And we all have highest respect for him. He is also the co-facilitator of the Sudanese Civic Convergence Tracks Initiative. He will speak about that in particular right now. And he is also the technical advisor to the Impact Policy Group. And all the rest I leave to Ahmed. Thank you. Welcome, Ahmed.
As soon as I was preparing to come up, suddenly my nose started running. So you will have to forgive me. First of all, thank you to the organizers. Thank you, Marina. Thank you to HBS and all of the co-hosts of this convening. We appreciate you in particular for being here in the room, the solidarity that you and Germany overall has shown to Sudan, not just since the war, but since the transition took place. I think Germany was one of the key actors that stood by the Sudanese people for the past several years. So thank you. As you know, the conflict in Sudan really does not require us to speak. It speaks for itself. The displacement crisis, it is the largest crisis ever recorded by the United Nations. And the reality on the ground often gets obscured. We hear numbers, we don't understand stories. And what I'm here to talk about today are the voices from the ground. Since the crisis began, one of the unseen impacts of the conflict has been the complete marginalization of civilian voices, of the people on the ground who are living the reality of the conflict. Many of the traditional civil society leaders have been forced to flee, like over 13 million Sudanese. But those that remained are facing a very difficult reality of living and coexisting in very localized parochial conflicts that are often completely disconnected from the national narrative of the war. And the marginalization of civilian voices does not mean that civilian actors and civil society is not organizing and mobilizing. One of the things that came about June last year was an initiative called the Sudan Civic Convergence Tracks, which brought together some initially 15 civil actors that then grew to 30, that has now grown to 35. And this initiative seeks to bridge the gap between civic actors in Sudan. It is not alone. There are several other initiatives that have also come about that are seeking to address some of the real challenges facing civilians on the ground. And the presentation I'm going to give today is trying to highlight some of those activities. We, as civil actors, are tied and are speaking for people inside, on the ground. The actors of the initiative conducted some 18 different consultations across 11 states in the country. And these consultations took place across the conflict lines. We saw that they were conducted under severe security constraints. Oftentimes, in one instance, drone strikes had to shift the activity to an online consultation. Movement restrictions limit mobilization and civic action because of the violence. Even saying the word peace in many parts of the country is an impossibility. Of course, the consultations highlighted the humanitarian toll of the violence. We saw that basic services have completely deteriorated across the country. Schools have been converted to shelters. Children prevented from accessing their basic rights. And today we see that the school exams are only being administered to part of the country, whereas some hundreds of thousands of children are prevented from their basic right to education. Of course, displacement compounds all of these crises, with IDPs facing the most severe challenges to their basic livelihood and dignity. At the same time, what we saw and heard is that women are actively mediating the conflict in their communities. They are the real peacemakers, and they're often excluded from formal processes. They are not given a seat at the table. We also heard about the gender-based violence that is taking place, especially faced by young women. And these women demand recognition and do not want to be seen as victims. There is a very high willingness for civilians to be included in formal processes. Unfortunately, we're seeing also mistrust between civilians on the ground and elites, whether across the board. This requires real sustained dialogue, not just one-off events. Here you see some of the photos of the consultations that were conducted across the country. Youth are ready to lead. They are organizing through national bodies like youth platforms and groups, but also in their communities. However, they lack the resources and platforms to sustain their engagement. The key demands that we heard are that people are demanding an end to the war. They are demanding an end to the drone strikes. They're also demanding that humanitarian interventions are locally driven. We, of course, know about the impressive work that's been done by local humanitarian actors on the ground. Women demand to be included in peace processes from the outset. The funding of local peace initiatives and the inclusion, in particular, of those displaced by the violence. Now, civil society is organizing not just by converging together, they are also putting pen to paper. A draft theory of change has been developed by civic actors, and this is trying to address the root cause of violence, transforming the violence and the conflict from the ground up. We've identified that there are 4 key elements of the violence that has been going on in Sudan from 1955. First is the absence of a shared state and national identity. This is at the root cause of Sudan's violence. Second is the militarization of politics and society. Third is the external predation and interventions and interference. And fourth is the resource scarcity and the war economies. Tomorrow there's going to be an event organized with the participation of our colleague Suleiman Beldu. We hope you are able to attend. Now, to address this, the theory of change identified 6 pathways which are highlighted here. These pathways have a theoretical logic behind how each can be addressed. And these are not necessarily sequential. They should be taking place in a, let's say, in a process where civic actors are addressing each element of this, along with the armed actors, along with the political actors, and the international community. Stopping the violence is obviously the first imperative, followed by conflict transformation, transitioning political contestation from armed means to civic and peaceful means. Addressing the absence of state institutions, the fact that this war has decimated the meager and weak institutions that had already existed. Of course, addressing the social fabric and social cohesion, which this war has torn apart. Fifth is demilitarizing society and politics and the economy. And then finally is the war economies, which have predated every element of Sudanese society today. We have a call to action. First, sustained pressure for humanitarian ceasefire, of which there is a plan that has been produced by one of the civil society groups, the Democratic Platform. We have copies here for you to take. It's also going to be shared online later today. Meaningful civilian inclusion. We understand that there is a perception that civilians are divided. This is not true. Civilians are unified in their ultimate goal, which is ending this devastation. We may not agree on all the means, but we have a clarity of vision, and our objective is one. Third, there's a need to invest in the infrastructure that makes civilians converge and makes that convergence possible. Today, what we're asking of you is to continue the solidarity you have shown to Sudanese people, for which we are grateful, but we are demanding that you continue to raise your voices and stand with those on the ground and support the civilian actors that are trying to be the voices of those who are marginalized. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this wonderful introduction, Ahmed. And also thank you so much for sticking to the time, which I already wasted with all my many words in the beginning. So I would like to ask my panelists to join me here, and then we proceed, please. One is missing. Manisha, where? Oh, sorry. Now I'm not only old but also blind. I'm very sorry. You seem too far, but sorry. So let me briefly introduce to you those people who joined me just now on the panel. We have Aisha Hamad. She is also a member of the SCCT. And she is an activist and an expert on gender-based violence, on women's rights, and on peace. And she also used to be the gender advisor during the transitional period in Sudan, the advisor to the Prime Minister Hamdok. Then we have, there he is. we have Osman Mansour. He is the Director General of an organization for peace and development. And we are very happy that you also made it, because one of our panelists, who you saw in the first program, did not get a visa. Unfortunately, he was too young. So the authorities were too afraid that he would not go home, so he could not get the visa. But we are very happy that Osman could substitute at very short notice. Most welcome, Osman. Then we have Dr. Suleiman Baldo here. I think most of you also know him very, very well. It's very difficult always to introduce him, because he has been working on civilian issues, and especially on the question of resources and the misuse of resources in Sudan for so many years, and he's an expert for so many things. But he is here also in his capacity as founding director of Sudan Transparency and Policy Tracker. I'm rather sure you also know it, at least from the internet. If not, I highly recommend to follow that one. And last but not least, we have Ms. Manisha Burani Ushani Agalawata. She is from the Office of the UN Secretary General's Personal Envoy, Pekka Haavisto. But she is here not in her capacity as working with the UN, but especially as representing the Quintet. And I forgot in the beginning to mention who are members of the Quintet. It's, of course, the UN, it's the African Union, it's IGAD, it's the Arab League, and it's the EU. And it has been a long process to get those together, but they have now took it upon them to work with the civil part, if I may say so, of the Sudanese society, and they just ended a conference last night, and here she is. So we are really very, very happy, and you have very difficult days ahead of you still. And she will, of course, tell us a bit more about this process of the Quintet, where everybody, I think, is very curious to learn more about. Most welcome, Manisha. So in the first round of our panel discussion, I would like to ask my panelists, besides Manisha, for you it's always a bit of a special question, sorry, to tell us a bit more about an open letter also, or the content of an open letter, which was sent out today and which was worked out by 3 different networks of Sudanese civil society, SCCT, which was mentioned before, Manassa, which was also mentioned, and the Sudan Peace Call. And it went to the Quintet, to the Quad, to the German Foreign Office, and all those co-hosts of the conference on Wednesday. And it basically contains, focuses on 5 questions. The first one is, of course, addressing the humanitarian situation. But my panelists here will speak about the general inclusion at every stage of civil society, grounded in local realities, basically what Ahmed already talked about. The Sudanese civilians are organizing. You know that very often it's said Sudanese are not organized, they are all divided. So they will talk about that point. They are converging, and they, of course, demand to be heard. The third is the harmonization of peace and political processes. And last but not least, the civilian process must not be subordinated to the political process. So these are basically the key demands also, or the key issues on this paper. I don't know whether meanwhile we have copies here in the room. If not, of course, we will send out to all of you so that you all have it. And I'm rather sure it might be online also very soon. We will give you the link. Starting with Aisha, I would like to ask the question which I also would like to pose on all of you. Given where the process stands today, what is the single most important thing the international community must do differently to support a civilian-led path to peace? So that is basically our issue. So Aisha, you are most welcome to start.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you for the organizers and HP and Marina. It is the 3rd year of the war that destroyed thousands of houses and thousands of lives in Sudan. And it is very clear that generals only cannot contribute to the peace process. So now we are here speaking about the inclusion, the genuine inclusion of the civilians in this peace process and political process. I would say that there are many challenges that face women and youth and the grassroots that reduce their participation and inclusion in the peace and political process. These challenges, some of them related to the contextual challenges in Sudan, and some of them are related to the nature of the mediation and political and peace negotiation that handled by Quintet and by Quad. I would say that women and youth groups and grassroots are not in the table of the mediation. I will say that also, like, a very less number of women, and also regarding the issues of women and youth groups and grassroots are not in the table because the political and peace process is controlled by elite-centric model, which we need to move from this model and having an inclusive and consultative process that include women, youth, and grassroots groups. So from the history in Sudan, we found that when we focus only on the ceasefire without including other issues like the political process, how women be included, how civilians be included in this process, we found that the peace process and the peace agreement that come out from this negotiation is not permanent, and it is not inclusive. If it is not inclusive, it will not be sustainable. So if we speak about inclusion of the civilians, I would suggest that Quintet and Quart and people who are negotiating peace should include women, youth, grassroots from the starting of the peace process and from the starting of the political process, and include them from day one. Not just when there is an event, people invite women and like a few number of women and a few number of youth to just represent the others, but we need to have that very inclusive consultative process that include the grassroots. It's not just the number of the grassroots. We need also to include issues that related to the youth, include issues, include also the needs of women, because we have like a lot of civilians who are removed from such consultations. If I looked at the process of the Quintet and Quart, I would say that like a very few women and a very few youth groups and grassroots who are represented in the consultative process. So we need a different approach that including all actors and including mainly women issues, women voices, and the grassroots. As we did in the SCCT that presented by Ahmed, we did like a grassroots consultation to see and hear about the perspective of women regarding the peace process, and we felt that and we found that they have this feeling of that their needs are not expressed in such meetings. So we need to have, as I said, a bottom-up approach that includes the needs, issues, and demands of women and youth and grassroots, because the women and youth group who are the main like functioning groups or the main system who are functioning on the ground, and they are helping the community and they are providing services that needed by the Sudanese now, and they are the only people who are working on the ground. So we need to have them in the table. We need to have them, to have their issues, to have their needs, and listen to their voices. Instead of like just having numbers and say that women are here, but women's needs are different. Youth groups' needs are different. We need to have a genuine inclusion of women, grassroots, and youth in all process, and starting, as I said, from the design. Women agenda should be included from the design, not just as adding up as numbers and asking them to attend such event. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aisha. And we heard already from you now, but also from Koduda in the beginning, that women are really, they are the victims, but they are really fed up with being only treated as victims. And this we hear even from some political parties. So we cannot include more women because they are so busy with caring for the families and for themselves, and they are traumatized. So that is why we cannot invite them into our meetings. So it's very clear that this is a very wrong approach. So maybe for later also, I would like to place the question how it works the other way around, because I'm always wondering how does it work that the results and what is happening here, for instance, in Berlin, is then be fed back to the grassroots. So it's not a one-way, but maybe we can discuss that later also. Osman, may I invite you now to give your contribution?
Thank you. Thank you for Heinrich. Thank you for the British, for the German government and the German civil society, for providing the space for the Sudanese to talk about the issue of Sudan and find the way, to solve the problem. Appreciate that. And I'm here to talk about the civil society, Sudanese civil society. We constantly hear the claim that, the Sudanese civil society are not, they are fragmented, and they are divided, and they don't speak in one voice. I'm just here to remind the international community and the AU and the IGAD as well, and those who are involved in mediation or trying to find a way, to solve the issue of Sudan, that the Sudanese civil society are united and they are speaking in one voice and taking it back, like from 1989, since the coup of al-Bashir, the Sudanese civil society, with all their dimension in all locality, in all state, they manage, to work together. They manage to coordinate. They manage, to have coalitions and to fight the regime constantly for 30 years until they succeeded in December. And the whole world is a witness that. The December revolution, it was the effort of the Sudanese civil society, the effort of the Sudanese civil society of being together, of working together, of being able to coordinate the effort, and fighting, for the civil state and democratic state. And they succeeded. Unfortunately, after the coup, they only had like less than 2 years, to settle down, to bring the people, to work, towards the civil and democratic state. And the coup happened. And after the coup also, they come back together, the Sudanese civil society, and they fight the coup until the war outbreak in Sudan between the two generals. And as you know, the civil society also, was deeply and hugely impacted, by the war between the two generals. They are the one who are caught in the crossfire. They are the one who being killed. They are the one who being IDP in the local, inside Sudan. They are the one who are refugees outside in the neighboring country. Millions of them, they are outside there. But still, regardless to the situation that they are in, inside Sudan and outside Sudan, still they are working to address the issue of the war. They are still talking about the need to stop the war as soon as possible. They are still coordinating. They are still talking to each other. They are still providing assistance and help and support inside and outside Sudan. And inside Sudan, as you know, that it is very hard, whether you are on SAF side or RSF side, they still, both sides oppress the Sudanese civil society, some of them being arrested, some of them even being killed. And those who are also outside Sudan, they live in refugee camp or inside the city, also, they live in very bad situation. Regardless to all this, they still manage to coordinate, they still working together. And in the last few months also, I will just mention few of the Sudanese civil society, the conversion track, as you see their members here, the Sudan Civil Society Platform, the Sudan Call for Peace, the women groups, the youth group, and they are all there, and they are working together, and they speak with one voice to stop the war, to allow the humanitarian assistance, to flow into those who are trapped in Sudan, and also, they are calling, for all Sudanese, to sit in the table and to solve this matter in the table from the day one. Unfortunately, it's not happened, and they're still fighting. They are still calling for that, and we demand that Sudanese civil society to be included in every negotiation step, because we are the one who are most affected, by this war. We are the one who being caught in the crossfire. We are the one who being detained and killed by both warring party. So we should be part of any peace negotiation. We should be part in any peace table that, so that, the civil society, they represent the vast majority of the Sudanese, and their voices need to be heard. Thank you very much, and we hope that we'll start, from Berlin, and appreciate if I exceed the time. I'm sorry about that. Did I?
Not at all. So I'm really amazed because this is another prejudice on Sudanese that everybody always thinks, oh, they are late, they like to talk too much, they never keep time. Obviously, this is a very different civil society than you have in mind, possibly. Suleiman.
Yeah, what do you have for me?
The same, like for the others, you have the difficult part to elaborate a bit on the political process and that the civil process cannot be subordinated, of course. So this is basically your...
The question of these peace processes for mediators, from the perspective of the mediators, you know, they want to stop the fighting and restore some level of normalcy in the country torn by civil wars or by internal conflicts. And therefore, the easiest path is always to negotiate with the men in uniform, the men carrying the arms, and find, you know, a resolution for them to reconcile. The best resolution is the model of wealth sharing, power sharing. So you have the political constituencies of the belligerents of the armed movements waiting for this moment to divide up, you know, the spoils, which are institutions of the state, and particularly those institutions that are revenue generating institutions, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Mining, you know, all ministries of natural resources, and so on. Political processes of this classic model reward the warring parties and leave aside, you know, the victims and the entire population, which has a lot of interest in a return to stability, but return to stability at this cost means that there is no justice, there is no economic rebuilding of the national economy, of the livelihoods of population, and that opens the door for a return to war, to civil war, by abandoned communities, communities that are marginalized, and so on. This is a scenario that has repeated itself many times in Sudan, and that's why in post-independence Sudan we had a cycle, non-stop, you know, armed rebellions, massive suppression because of the, you know, mindset of the military establishment in the country, of collective punishment of constituencies from which some youth raise up arms to protest against this injustice and so on. But this is not unique in Sudan. If you look at the history of civil wars across Africa, they always end up sliding in new cycles of violence, in new cycles of civil war. So we wish and hope that this time it would be different, that the mediators would really try to break this, you know, vicious circle by involving those who are, you know, the real pillars of stability in the country, and these are the civil actors. I was in Kampala, you know, visiting someone in their office the day Al-Fashir fell to the Rapid forces. There was a wave of humanity leaving the city. And my interlocutor, who I was visiting in their workplace, was in a Google Meet meeting with more than 100 participants. These were the emergency response rooms in North Darfur, talking to their colleagues from Al-Fashir about paths of where these people are going, and discussing with each other along the road what is the situation of those people who are walking, running away from the city, and what are their needs, and so on. It was fascinating. These are more than 100 participants coming together to try and help this, you know, this wave of humanity. And it tells you about a level of efficiency and of unity in civil society, volunteer actors on the ground trying to help each other to support, you know, tens of thousands of victims of conflict. This is the unity of civil society. It's really on the ground, and these actors are the first responders to the crisis on the ground. So all this talks about divisions among civilians. When you look at the reality on the ground, who is intervening to assist victims of conflict? Who is intervening to support, health facilities or, revive educational opportunities and so on? These are the civilians, and they are never at the table, as you mentioned. These are the women of Sudan, these are young people of Sudan, those who are not there, who don't have a voice. And what this initiative represents is to give voice to those voiceless people. And therefore, it must be heard. It's not an option to ignore it. And often, mediators and the international community representatives will say, civil society is too divided. We don't hear, we don't know who is saying what and so on. It's a very easy pretext to ignore the obvious. You either design a process that include the vital forces in the country, the ones that really are making change on the ground in these difficult circumstances, or you are condemning yourself to failure and Sudan to a repeat of the perpetual warfare that has prevented it from any stability all these years. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Suleiman. You were also, like your two colleagues, very, very clear in what you are saying. A mediation process was mentioned several times. Quad was mentioned. And I was wondering, is there a mediation process at this very time? I'm not sure if everybody knows what Quad is. Quad is the initiative led by the USA and containing also Egypt and Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And it was announced several times. They were very close to come to a humanitarian truce for 3 months, and then a process shall be followed. I'm not going to do any US bashing right now, but I'm just only saying that as many things are being said, and very often we do see very different results. So Manisha, you have now the difficult task, of course, because you are not representing the Quad, but the Quintet. And maybe you can just start also by telling us a bit more about why was the Quintet founded, and also what is the difference, because I know that some people just mix up the two and don't know who is who and blame the other one for something maybe they are even not responsible for. And you are just coming from a very, very long journey in trying to get some very different voices of civil society together. So welcome, Manisha.
Thank you, Marina, and thank you to the panelists as well. I think they've set the background for what I'm also going to speak about right now in terms of the Quintet. So I have the task of giving you a bit of a bland background on how this architecture came to be. Just to say that the Quintet, which is the African Union, the United Nations, the IGAD, and the League of Arab States, and the European Union, the idea behind it was to push for greater coordination of multilaterals in their response to the Sudan conflict. Coordination at the multilateral level is not new to the Sudan context, I would say. We had the trilateral at the time of the UNITAMs and the outbreak of the war, etc. And then you had UNIMID before that, which was a coordination between the African Union and the United Nations in its response to the crisis in Darfur. And so, this was a push throughout most of last year, and it came to fruition, I would say, around May, when through the Secretary General of the United Nations and with the counterpart of the chairperson in the African Union, we pushed for this high-level meeting of the minds of the three institutions, which was the League of Arab States, the African Union, and the United Nations on the margins of the League of Arab States summit in May of last year, and to push this idea that our collective efforts would be amplified if we were to join our efforts in the response to the Sudan crisis. So it was there that this sort of push began, and then it included IGAD, of course, and then laterally toward the end of the year, the European Union also came on board. And that's how the architecture was born. And it's all about joint action, joint messaging. This is how we can amplify our efforts, right? And join up our respective responses to the crisis. The focus of the quintet on the inter-Sudanese dialogue, maybe that's the part that many of the panelists are also addressing, came about, and so I would say, let's go back a bit. The dialogue process has been supported by the African Union and IGAD since 2024. It forms part of their roadmap on the Sudan crisis, both the AU and IGAD. And as I understand it, in 2024 was the beginning of how the AU and IGAD began to sort of push for a revitalization of a dialogue process. And I believe that there were consultations in 2024 and then the beginning of 2025. Look, for reasons we all know, I think a lot of, in large part, the dialogue is affected by ground dynamics, right? So you had hiatus between meetings, right? And when you have a hiatus between one sort of initiative and the next, things change, people's perspectives change, sides are changing, and it becomes difficult and it impacts the dialogue process, right? And I think at the end of last year, the African Union and IGAD tried to push again to advance the sort of launch of an inter-Sudanese dialogue around August or September of last year, if I remember correctly. And sort of there was, for lack of a better word, a bit of pushback because there had been so much time, issues have changed, the situation is evolving. I'm being very frank about it. And so the request from many of the stakeholders was we need more sort of preparatory dialogue, right? And so AU and IGAD basically said, oh, look, we have this architecture already, so why don't we now bring in more partners, right, to support this push forward to advance the process? And that's how all of us sort of came behind this AU-IGAD sort of push for the inter-Sudanese dialogue. And so throughout last year, throughout the end of last year, this framework had several consultations with, I would say, a broad range of stakeholders, including the main political blocs, as many civil society stakeholder groups that we could put in front of our principles. And I say our principles because I am part of this technical team that sort of supports the Quintet, which is the AU, UN, IGAD, and League of Arab States. So as to put as many different voices in front of our principles so that they can understand from various perspectives how best to advance the dialogue. Where we are now, in terms of the Quintet, is that we are assessing what we've heard. I mean, I can say that, you know, we've spoken to Sudan Peace Call. I know I reached out to Ahmed and others trying to get as many sort of civil society networks also in front of these principles, beyond some of the other actors that they have spoken to in the past, as some of the panelists have alluded to. And where we are now is sort of assessing what we have heard in terms of what they think about the process design. So when Aisha says, you know, we need to have women and youth, for example, involved from the beginning, I do think this is we are in that phase where all of these various stakeholder groups are having a say in terms of how this process could be designed and advanced. And that's my perspective. And I'm also very positive on two counts. One, I'm positive that we've been able to, it took a while, but this architecture of 5 multilaterals it's a big deal, and it means that, you know, they're rising to the challenge of what this crisis is by coming together to try and advance the dialogue process. And the second count is, I do think that there, as many of the panelists have said, there is that perception that, you know, civilians are fragmented, but in theory, I don't think that's actually true, because what we have heard is that there is this sort of resounding consensus around stopping the war, the fact that this is a war against civilians, these types of messages. And then that brings me to what's happening here in Berlin. There has been a bit of a conflation of issues. There's a lot of sort of mis and disinformation about what the civilian segment is about in Berlin in the next 2 days, that there's going to be some sort of launch of a peace process, and understandably so, that there is a lot of sort of expectation and tension around it, because nobody wants to be excluded from what may be the cusp of a new process, right? So that's understandable, and it's good that there is that sort of tension. But we also need to make sure that people understand what's happening and manage expectations. Tomorrow is about, Wednesday is about a call for de-escalation and a call to advance peace negotiations. It's time to now negotiate peace. I think, so as Marina said, yesterday we had a preparatory meeting with approximately 40 civilians who will be in this sort of civilian segment on Wednesday, sort of preparing the ground for that call, right? And for me, the achievement is that they sat in the same room, and many said that they hadn't sat with some of these people for the last 3 years. So that's an achievement in itself. Because the last sort of AU-IGAD process that I saw last February had stakeholders refusing to sit in the same room. So I think we've come a long way, and maybe it's because there is unity around that very message, that it's time to now stop the war because the toll is just too high on civilians. And I do think that there is consensus around that message. So maybe I stop there and then take some questions, etc.
Thank you so very much, Manisha. I think you are very right. There are a lot of myths, but I think this is also partly due to really little information coming out. Yeah? So this issue of transparency, which we mentioned before, is really a big one. And I always have the feeling that the less information comes out, of course, the bigger the myth. And especially spoilers of the process who do not want to see the peace because they benefit very well from the war, they misuse such a situation to create all these stories also around processes. I think we are all very much aware how difficult it is to have these 5 different organizations, big organizations hosting this, and I'm rather sure that also there might be attempts here and there still of some countries to do their own kind of things. We know that so many people are involved in the Sudanese, countries are involved and benefit from the Sudanese war, unfortunately. So I'm rather sure there will be questions later on from the floor, also directed to you, and I can imagine also maybe here on our panel there might be questions for you, Manisha. I was wondering, as I said before, one thing I'm interested in is to know how can you with everything, whether you do it at your level, Manisha, or we do it here on this level, how can we make sure that the grassroots hear what we are doing? And let's say that you are kind of responsible to them also, not only collecting their views, because to me sometimes I feel even that one is a kind of exploitation if we collect their views and don't report back. So are there any mechanisms how you report back? Anybody who would like to answer that?
Absolutely. This is a very critical element of what we're calling for. As I mentioned in the presentation, it is not supposed to be event-based engagement, but continuous, sustained dialogue. And what we have showcased here is that people are demanding to be heard, and there is a need for accountability. Part of what SCCT and other civil society initiatives are trying to do is sustain this dialogue on the ground. Despite the security concerns, despite the access concerns, there are continuous efforts to ensure that dialogue happens, and it's a clarion call for us, from you, to make sure that's going to happen, and that's certainly on the agenda.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Anybody else who would like to comment on that? Manisha, you?
Maybe if If I may also, like, in preparation for the civilian segment of Berlin, it's just an example. There were so many workshops leading up to this moment with various stakeholder groups, etc. And those sort of the outcomes of those workshops were also being fed into us, and we were sharing sort of the broad ideas that were coming up around de-escalation and things like that. So that was one example of how we need to think when we move forward, right? Because I understand, I hear the call for grassroots to be involved. Right now, sort of the work is at a level that it's not in Sudan. I remember when I was part of UNAMID, et cetera, we were in Sudan. We were able to undertake those consultations. But as you're saying, we need to find mechanisms that can feed the voice of the grassroots into these processes. And we're open to hear how, you know, those mechanisms, what kind of mechanisms can be put in place to do so. We also rely on a lot of the networks, right? That there are women's networks and there are youth networks who have broad reach in the country, and they are feeding these messages, because I can say yesterday, I mean, it was a lively discussion about the very messages that you're talking about, right? And hopefully that would be part of the call that would come out eventually on the 15th, so.
The Sudanese civilians who are participating in this segment of the dialogue, you know, with the Sudanese and political actors on Wednesday, did have a discussion, preparatory discussion, and came up with a document on which they have consensus calling for de-escalation. The peace process as it is structured now consists of a call and push by the Quad, US, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and United Arab Emirates, for a humanitarian ceasefire. The Quintet, as I understand, is tasked with leading the political civilian process, you know, that accompany the cessation of hostilities when that occur. The call by civic and political actors, you know, who just concluded their preparatory meeting and are participating on Wednesday on the conference on Sudan, is for de-escalation. It's, you know, this is short of ceasefire. It is necessary to happen. Why? Because Sudan's warring parties have shown a level of cruelty, of indifference to human life, to the suffering of the population, deliberate intent to destroy livelihoods. We have seen them exchanging bombing of markets, of power stations, water stations, hospitals. And I believe that, you know, if this is the mindset of the military actors in this conflict of the two warring parties, there should be enough will and determination in the international community to really compel them to abide by the basic principles of international humanitarian law. I have seen it happening in the civil war in Congo, where Eastern Congo was under the control of the rebels and the central government in Kinshasa was in the control of the rest of the country. The UN then, which had a big peacekeeping mission, ensured that youths on both sides of the divide do not lose their future by, so they were facilitating the holding of national examinations for high schools, for qualifying for higher education, happen in rebel areas under the control of the national system of education. Inspectors of education were flown from Kinshasa to Eastern Congo. Teachers who needed to be trained on administering these examinations and so on. And the same was true for public health. Immunization is today happening in the areas held by the Sudan Armed Forces, while it's not happening in the areas held by the Rapid Support Forces in Western Sudan. This doesn't make sense at all. If the UN, World Health Organization, UNICEF, you name it, are willing to, restart universal immunization for children on the government health side, it should be nationwide. The fact that there is a de facto partition of the country should not prevent these essential services from occurring. And by all means, the international community should really prevail on the belligerents to stop bombing civilians in markets, in hospitals, in schools, as is happening routinely every single day, and to stop threatening power stations, water stations, and even dams are now a subject of pressure between the Sudan Armed Forces and Rapid Support Forces. This is a disaster that is, one of the worst, in its cruelty, and the international community should not be standing by, just as an observer or a spectator of this level of cruelty. There has to be some high political determination to force a de-escalation even before a full ceasefire. And this is what I'm calling on the Quintet and the Quad and the rest of the international community to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suleiman. Aisha?
Thank you. For the Quintet, we are very grateful of your efforts toward the Sudanese peace process. But when it comes to the Berlin conference, I heard that the most people who are invited to attend the Berlin conference are the Sumud, the Assis, and the Democratic Bloc, where civilians, there are not a lot of civilians who are attending such this conference. So we need to have, although the de-escalation and ceasefire agreement, there are a very technical aspect in it, but we need to have the civilians who are involved in this. For example, they can be in the monitoring mechanism, they can be in the committees so we can make those conflicting parties accountable of what they said and they committed themselves. Also, it's not just the generals, or it's not just RSF and SAF. Even the international community actors who are committing themselves to do so and have this commitment, we need a monitoring mechanism and monitoring, aspect that assure that the commitments that happened, for example, in Berlin conference, be implemented and Sudanese people benefit from such commitment. So what's the difference between the Berlin conference that coming these days and the other conference that held by the international community, and a lot of donors and a lot of actors committed themselves, but there was no follow-up mechanism. There was no mechanism that or bodies who are following the implementation of such commitments in this conference. What's the difference between Berlin and other conferences that are dealing with Sudanese issue? Thank you.
That's a quite broad question. Maybe just to say, look, I think from the Quintet perspective, the Berlin conference, the main focus is the humanitarian situation, right? And it's the funding, the pledging conference, and then there's the political event that will bring a diverse group of member states as well. And I understand that there is a sort of hope for principles to be articulated that member states can abide by when they respond to the Sudan conflict, etc. And then for the civilian side, as I said, I think the de-escalation call and a call for advancing peace, if it's possible, on Wednesday, right, will feed into that, right? That those two very important segments, which is the ministerial, you'd be informing, it's amplifying civilian voices around a need to stop the war now, if that's possible, right? And that would feed into the ministerial session. And it will also highlight the impact of the conflict on civilians for the humanitarian pledging conference as well. That's what Berlin is about. And I think that's how the civilian call will be sort of impacting those two very important sessions. So that I can just speak to how we see Berlin, but I can't necessarily speak to other conferences.
Osman, anything you would like to add to that?
Well, thank you. I'm really happy, just to hear that there is a consensus and a unity of voice that, that they're gonna push, and I hope this is gonna be the last push, for the warring party, to come to the table. And we hope that you will succeed this time. Just a quick reminder, from my experience from the peace talks that, I witnessed, for example, in the last few years in Sudan, taking it from Doha to Juba, to Abuja as well. What happening, in this, what happened in this peace agreement that, the warring party and, they usually, they have a group of people that, they call them the civil society, and they are ready to be deported, to the peace table. They are ally, with the government, or ally, with the one of the warring party, at that time. And will be just, they deport them, to the location of the peace talk just for the decoration, for the last picture that, the civil society is being represented, and, that we hear their voices. And I hope that, the UN will not repeat, the experience that we had, in the last 3 peace agreement, the ones that I just mentioned. And make sure that, the civil society, are really the real civil society who represents, the vast majority of the Sudanese civil society, that they are there and their voice are heard, and they can be part of anything. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much also, Osman and all the others. I don't know if it's only me. I always have a bit of a bad feeling when I hear Berlin Conference. We all know that Berlin Conference has another connotation when the colonial powers partitioned Africa. So maybe this one can really contribute to the unity of Africa, and not to any further partition. Before I open up for questions from the audience, maybe each of you can say in one sentence what would mark a success of the conference, of the Sudan conference on Wednesday. So when would you call it a success? I'm also asking that because so many journalists ask me, do you think it will be a success? Okay, so up to you now, and then maybe I know what to answer. Would you like to start, Suleiman?
Well, I would start by that there is already a partial success in getting the political actors and civic actors who participated in this preparatory meeting to agree on one document calling for a ceasefire and for de-escalation, and on some political, path for the post-war political arrangement. That's not an easy feat because particularly among political actors, it has not been possible to, to get them to agree on one objective. There is a high level of polarization, I would say, and each of the Sudan armed forces, rapid support forces, built political constituencies, for themselves, and these have been the ones giving the appearance of this division among civilians. But civilians really want this. They want an immediate end to the war, and they want a democratic future for Sudan, and they want justice also for all the violations that have occurred in the country. So this partial. And what would be a success is for the international community to adopt this as a blueprint for the peace process in the country.
I would like to see I would like to see in this conference women included and participated effectively. I don't want to see like just 3 women that selected by dominant male and sit with the male in the conference and say we agreed on this, but I want to see effective participation of women in Berlin conference, and also in the document that come out from this conference, women issues and the grassroots actor issues be included and clearly stated in the document and any declaration that come out from the conference. Thank you.
Sure. So I think Dr. Baldo already spoke for me as well. So my hope is that Dr. Baldo and the other 39 representatives at the civilian segment will be able to finalize that call on Wednesday. And that would be the success. But as he has already said, it was, I think, from my point of view, already a success that we were able to bring these civil and political forces yesterday to begin these discussions.
Since the beginning of the war, we have seen like a lot of initiatives starting from Jeddah onwards, so many initiatives, to solve out the Sudan's problem, to make peace. And unfortunately, we raised our hope as the Sudanese as their announcement come out that, Jeddah peace talk, they're gonna something. And then we wait for it impatiently, and then the initiative die without even, knowing as Sudanese, why the initiative is dead. And I hope that this Berlin conference, will come out, on top of what my colleague just had said, the inclusion and the representation of the civil society. I hope that this initiative will have a deadline. For example, it is a call. We are united. We are speaking as one voice, as international community and the regional. This is the final call for the warring party to come to the negotiation table. If you did not come by this date, then should be 1, 2, 3, so that we know that we are waiting for something. If it's not happen, something's going to happen. It has to be not on the top of the civilian, not like the imposing other things, on the civilian, no, but something concrete, on the warring party, the general, that, if they did not come to the negotiation table, that something serious is going to happen by the international community. And I'm sure that the international community, they have the will, if they wanted to do that, and we can achieve peace. Thank you.
Marina, you asked for one sentence of what success looks like. My colleagues gave paragraphs. I will say one word: de-escalation.
Okay, thank you so much. I think I would like to open now to the floor. Okay, there's already some questions. I would suggest we collect 3, and then you answer them. So please, you introduce yourself. Just wait. Let the lady beside you start. You introduce yourself, and I forgot your name again completely. I'm very sorry for that.
Thank you very much. My name is Iman. I'm from the Sudanese Women for Peace, a diaspora organization. I think we have a very modest outlook and expectation of the Berlin conference. That is not fair. We started by saying that we would like to have de-escalation because some civilians actually converge, 40 people only. That is given as an indication of success, very modest, because now they agreed to sit down in one room. Before they didn't do that. During 3 years, many people's lives have been shattered. 19 million children out of schooling system, all the number of children in Germany. Imagine we are in Germany now, all the children here do not have access to school. All these kind of modest expectations are really not doing anybody any kind of good. The most important thing is the time frames. What if the de-escalation thing didn't happen? What if we didn't have a ceasefire? What is plan B? The theory presented by the civilians did not have a time frame. Are we talking about one Sudan when you talk about the state, or we are talking about a very imminent partition? Are we talking about phase 1 or phase 2 or phase 3? Or are we talking about these are theories and suppositions which we are expecting to take time, I don't know when in the future. If we have any kind of indication of we are having early warning system, because there is a big discourse that is absent from the theory and from the expectation, protection. I didn't hear the word protection. If the de-escalation didn't take place, what is happening to the people on the ground, the people on the borders, the people in a geopolitical kind of implication of the war going on now that millions of Sudanese are in Gulf states? Nobody actually give any kind of idea of what is going to happen to them? What about the convergence of the international community? The civilians are not having any kind of unity, maybe due to too many things. What about the coming together of the international community? The AU have a five-funding mission. The United Nations the Security Council and the United Nations Human Rights Council have a FFM. What is the convergence between these FFMs? What do we actually expect to have if we do not have a convergence even of the people in the international community with the leverage to say something about Al-Ubaid under siege? 2735, that resolution didn't help Al-Fashir. We have the same question now in Kordofans. What is that kind of indication we are having to say that there is some kind of might, there is some kind of hope that we are going to be finding the voices of women? When we say we are in the diaspora, we are not only in the diaspora, we are representing so many organizations. And the diaspora is the biggest donor in Sudan. All the conferences that have actually convened to pledge is between 25 to 33% honoring pledges coming forward. The rest of the gap is actually covered by the diaspora. So I would like to ask the AU, please, what are your mechanisms? You said that you would like to find mechanisms to include people. We would like to work with you on that very, very much, because we do not know what are the mechanisms to include people in your processes of mediation, especially women. We can't see anything, and if you do not mind, Maria, enlightening us, we came here at our own cost because we are not invited to any of the mediations historically from day one. If there are anything that we can participate on, because we are day in and day out consulting with people on the ground, on the borders, outside. People in Egypt now forced to be returned to Sudan, and children without any access to protection because they can go and have no schooling, no income, and be subject to crime and trafficking and drugs. Protection is very paramount, and if it is not featuring in any plans of civilians behind closed doors or protected because of they are chosen or behind any kind of discrete kind of phases without a continuum, we're going to be having a very bleak future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hannah?
Yes, it is me, I think. I'm going to tell you something surprising me about us as Sudanese.
Sorry, can you also introduce yourself first?
Oh, yes, of course I will. Yeah, okay. I like to stand. Is that okay? Yeah, moment.
Not going to be a very long speech.
No, it will be 10 minutes only. No, I'm sorry. I'm Mohammed Jamal Ad-Din Hamid, a chairman of Sidr International Organization, The Hague, the Netherlands, and I'm member of the coordinating body called CERTRAC, and contains 112 organizations inside Sudan. And I'm saying that to tell you the surprise in a while. But the surprise that surprised me, could surprise some of you, that as far as we Sudanese talk about peace, we are far from peace. And as long as we are talking about convergence and about coming together, then we have more divisions. And as far as we have political initiatives, international or local, we have more wars. And this could be true with the statistics. And now, as an example, just an example, the SCCT organization, they are talking about that we as civil society, we are now united. Actually, we have 112 organizations inside Sudan, but we never heard about this SCCT. Has nothing to do with that SCCT is bad. No, but we are not united and Sudan is too big. That is the thing. And the issues of the people is different and interests is different inside Sudan itself. And it is a big country. And that is why we have different wars inside Sudan itself. It is not one war. It is many wars with different backgrounds, yeah. And also in regard to the international initiatives, and they talk about mediation. There is no mediations because those people who is mediated is actually part of the conflicts. like those countries around the region, are part of the conflict, so there is no mediation. Those partners of conflict, actually. This is, to keep it short, let me, Marina, just one moment to answer your question about what we could expect from this conference of 15 April. I think we could expect from this conference twice success, not one. The first one is to stop war and pave the way for peace inside Sudan. This is number one. And number two is to restore human and environmental social situation inside Sudan. This is number two. And this conference has to succeed in one of them. This is why I said two, has to succeed in one of them, because if failed completely, this will be not acceptable.
I think your point is very clear. Thank you very much.
It's good. It's okay. Thank you.
I can take one more now. Over there. Yes, the lady over there. This light is terrible. I can even not see. Thank you.
My name is Shima Sami. I am representing Madad Initiative from Egypt. We work closely with Sudanese migrant and refugees, especially women. And I'm here just to send a message from them. Please make more space to listen to their voices, because somehow they are stuck in Egypt, and the situation in Egypt is already difficult for Egyptians. So you can imagine if you are a migrant and now in Egypt, it's pretty difficult. So especially the civil society actors from Sudan who are now in Egypt, they feel that they don't have a space to participate in any kind of effort to help their country or in the peace or whatever. So they ask for more attention, more effort to give them voice, to give them space through any kind of effort. So I'm asking everyone here to reach out to them through different, not only, of course, my initiative is quite small, but there is a lot of effort in Egypt. And we are welcoming anyone to reach out to the Sudanese people themselves in Egypt, especially the grassroots and the true actors for peace and for future in Sudan. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for reminding us, especially on the situation of refugees in Egypt. I can only underline that we just discussed it also today in a different circle, because so many Sudanese are really being killed. We have so many stories. They are tortured, they are in prison, and they are forced to return, and so on and so on. I don't want to blame anybody, but I think we all know that also Germany has a migration agreement with Egypt. I think this should also be a topic maybe of a different, we cannot discuss it here at length, but I think it definitely needs to be addressed. And I think there is an article in Taz today also about this very point, which I really recommend also to read. Thank you very much, both of you, for reminding us also on that. Any comments, answers to the 2 points from the panel? Osman?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Iman, and thank you the other speaker also. I didn't get her name. For mentioning, what the situation in Egypt. We appreciate that. And definitely some of the issues that Iman has just talked about is like the safe zone. There is so many details, about the peace initiative. Because just the space is not enough, we are not going to talk about the detail about it. Now we are mentioning or highlighting, the big issues like the inclusion, the women need to be part of the peace talk, youth, they need to be part of the peace talk, general civil society, and so on. and need to be genuine, need to be time frames. These are the details. We are not going into the detail, but we appreciate that you mentioned that. But the gentleman, Mr. Muhammad Jamal, I was a little just confused, to be honest. He mentioned that, those who are mediating for the peace talks, they are part of the conflict. And then he came back and he said that he was expecting some outcome, from Berlin talk. All of them, Jeddah, Manama, for me they are the same. For me, they are the people who are not Sudanese, whether from the regional AU or IGAT or the EU or the American or the British, the German. They are the outsider who are trying, to solve, to mediate between the two warring parties who are Sudanese. When saying that, they are part of the conflict is very confusion, create very kinds of confusion. They are not part of the conflict, they are the one who try to mediate. The conflict that in Sudan we created ourselves, we are responsible for it as Sudanese. We need to take full responsibility for it, and we are seeking help of the regional or international, to mediate, because we fail to make that peace between ourselves. That's the fact. And the other thing is, it is true, we here, the SCCT, maybe you didn't hear about it, we are part of the Sudanese civil society, and there is a lot of group of the Sudanese civil society. Sudan is a huge country with 18 states, more than 100 and plus locality. Different problem from the different state. You find that problem, for example, in Darfur is different from the problem that you had in Kordofan, different from the one that you had in South Nuba or the Blue Nile, the one that in the north or the center. It's different. But the common thing, between all of this, that, they are all impacted, by the dictatorship that they run for the country for the 13 years. It's as a result of the dictatorship of the 30 years. It's as a result of the war. It's as a result of the coup that happened, recently, and as a coup as well. All this conflict is created, by the dictatorship. And the civil society, nobody in Sudan, any group in the Sudan, they will never say that, we represent, the whole Sudanese civil society and we are the voice for it. And the civil society arena and the civil society platform is the voluntary platform with very high price. Those who are working, in the civil society now, those who are working in Kampala, they cut, from the little things that, they have, to support the Sudanese in there. And those who are working in Cairo, as they, the two women that my two colleagues mentioned also, they are paying very high price, to help the Sudanese, in diaspora. And those who are working in Sudan, they are paying their life price for it. Some of them being killed, that. Some of them being detained, whether they are in the RSF area or whether in the SAF area. So the civil society, no group, since the establishment of Sudan, they will say that, we represent the whole Sudan. Simple as that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment just about the conversion of the civil society in Sudan regarding your point, Mohammed Jamal. We are a group that, I will say that we are open to accommodate and to have a coordination with other civil society actors inside Sudan and outside Sudan. So we developed this theory of change and we called it as a draft analytical paper that drafted by us, but we are calling for the civil society, Sudanese civil society, to have their inputs and insights in this document. Also, we have a joint letter that we submitted to the international actors in Berlin Conference, but I would say that we are very open to any civil society actor who have the shared objective that is stopping the war, as a humanitarian assistance, and all these objectives that we have. I will say that we are very open for the civil society to join us, and we are calling for the Sudanese civil society to work together, and we are very open to coordinate with you and with other civil society actors that they shared our objectives. Thank you so much.
Is this working? Yeah. Thank you to the colleague from Egypt for highlighting the situation in Egypt, and it's mirrored in Chad, in South Sudan, in Ethiopia, and across the region. And the 2 points raised by Muna and Muhammad are very valid. The central issue, I think, is about ownership and representation. This is something that civil society has to work towards. It is the homework that we cannot bypass. I think, as Osman mentioned, to the questions about the agenda for peace that is being undertaken, I will just blame Marina for limiting my time to present 3 things, but in 10 minutes. But I'm certain we are able to share more details about the timeline which you raised. It's a very important question. The timelines are something that are unfortunately undermined or constrained by the reality on the ground. As much as there's a priority of urgency, there's also the priority of ownership that you both raised. So both things must be taken into consideration. There's a urgent demand for this conflict to end, but in order for it to end urgently, we need to do the homework of getting people on the same page. Muhammad, you raised the question about unity. The objective is not unity of organizations or groupings or platforms. It is the unity of vision. It's going to be impossible to unify civil society in any place, particularly a place like Sudan, but what we can do is to unify our purpose, and that's the ultimate objective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. We will have a second round of questions now. I just also would like to remind us that Imad was talking about the protection issue. We should not forget it. In the case of Egypt, we briefly touched upon it, but it's very big, much bigger. So maybe there can also be a comment later on. I think Garrett, you were next, and then Arne, and anybody else, and Peter Schumann. And if you are brief, all of you, then we can take more even.
Thanks. Gerhard Kurz from the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, or SWP. Thanks for this event and thanks for the discussion. It is indeed a very important moment, hopefully, in getting this a little bit further, at least. 2 questions to the panel. First, what is the power of civilian actors in Sudan on those with arms, those that are actually doing the fighting? How can a political process that may come out of the Quintet initiative help create the conditions to end the violence and start and create a truce? And what will actually be the impact of this call for de-escalation on those fighting? That's my first question. And the second one, there was a lot of talk about the need for inclusion, very understandably so. But my impression is here, but also elsewhere, there's a lot of focus on what may be called horizontal inclusion. So one more group, and that one more group, that one more stakeholder group. And of course, as you mentioned, Sudan is a very diverse and big country. So of course, there cannot be just one organization and so on. But at some point, of course, you also need to have some kind of limitation, right? If you want to have a manageable process. So I guess what is also important is what might be called vertical inclusion. So between those that can feasibly take part in any kind of mediation process, maybe more than 40 eventually, but probably not 40,000, to name 2 extremes perhaps. So how can future political process that is Sudanese led and owned and so on really focus also on improving this vertical line of inclusion? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm from the German media, reporter for Süddeutsche Zeitung. Thanks to the panel for giving us insights in the importance of civilian action towards peace. But I have actually a question going a bit beyond the Berlin conference, perhaps, and more focused on the Quad initiative. I would be interested in hearing your views on what you think is actually an effective means to pressure the warring parties, because you all mentioned the necessity to stop violence, but of course the question is, how is this being done? Are there any incentives for the warring parties to stop, or what is an effective way for the international community to put pressure on the warring parties if military intervention or military forces is not on the table? And I guess everybody agrees in the room that it is not in the table. So, because in some way this is the key question to be answered before you can achieve all the other things, how to stop the violence. And if you don't want to reward the warring parties by any peace agreement, as Osman said, which is not sustainable, how do you get them to stop the violence? It's a very simple but maybe the most difficult question. Thank you.
Peter Schumann will have the last question. Unfortunately, I also have to watch the time.
Yes, thank you very much. Peter Schumann. I've spent a lot of time in Sudan with the United Nations peacekeeping operations, negotiating peace agreements from CPA to Abuja to Doha. Suleiman, you said the success of this conference would be visible if there is a de-escalation. Now, I think we all know wars de-escalate if there is no weapon supply. Now, within the Quartet, the Quint, whatever you call them, you have countries represented, they're members of the United Nations, and they're supplying arms to this war. Is this a topic of this conference in Berlin, or are we again sort of trying to avoid the hot potato in the room and not mention that war requires military hardware? We have United Nations member governments. They are responsible to comply with the United Nations Charter, with international law, but they assemble knowingly violating international law because they are part of the international arms suppliers to facilitate the war. So de-escalation without a very clear statement about the supply of military hardware, I think, would be a major failure of this conference in Berlin.
Thank you very much, Peter. So 3 very concrete questions, basically dealing with the de-escalation and concrete steps and also pressure tools. So who of my panelists would like to answer? Suleiman, maybe?
No, I can't agree more with what you suggested here. You know, if you look at the Quad, you know, United Arab Emirates is entirely sustaining the military effort of the Rapid Support Forces by the supply of weapons, financial resources, logistics, even health and medical interventions, you know, for RSF wounded in battle and so on. Egypt, Turkey, Qatar, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia are all entirely behind the Sudan Armed Forces. After the fall of al-Fashir, we have seen a coordination, military coordination between Turkey and Egypt to provide aerial support for Sudan Armed Forces by flying strategic drones to disrupt RSF lines of supply. And these are the same drones that are bombing civilians in markets, you know, with the intent of inflicting the largest possible harm and so on. So yes, this should be #1 priority actually in the de-escalation. And then what I mentioned earlier of what is required of the belligerents in terms of their own actions, which, you know, are creating sufficient pressures and leverage from the international community to ensure that they do not target this essential infrastructure for, for civilians, the markets, the power stations, the water stations, and so on. But there are other forms of de-escalation which relate to making the lives of the population under the conditions of a de facto partition more, normal, in the sense that people need to, engage in livelihood activities that are now entirely disrupted by the war. Freedom of movement is essential. Cross-line freedom of movement. It's very difficult, if not impossible now, because of the security risks that are indicated. The international community, in a way, is complicit in this partition when it allows funding from the World Bank, African Development Bank, for early recovery interventions in areas held by the Sudan Armed Forces, because it's seen as the internationally recognized government, and not extending this same early recovery support for agricultural, for example, by the supply of agricultural essential inputs, fertilizers, and so on, to one side of the country and not the other. It's not the fault of farmers or herders in areas held by the Rapid Support Forces that they are geographically in this place. And therefore, there should be insistence and compelling, both parties to accept this kind of essential services to be provided. Immunization of children is one, education is another, to be happening, because clearly the belligerents are not in the mindset of stopping fighting. They want to fight to the very end, to the very last man standing. And I believe we should not allow them to take the entire population hostage while they are, taking this, destructive and totally, nihilistic approach to their contest for power and control of resources. So that I would, yeah.
I think this point also related to the putting pressure on the conflicting parties. It's not just the conflicting parties, also the international intervene in the Sudanese conflict and the trade of army, weapons that going to Sudan, and a lot of conflicting interests of the international actors and also the national actors. They will not stop the war because they have like this incentive of continuation of the war, the national actors and also the regional actors. I will say that dismantling the war economy is a must if we want to put pressure on the conflicting parties in Sudan. So they are benefiting of the continuation of the war, because they have also their financial interest in the continuation. If we wanna do the homework as a Sudanese, we should analyze this situation very deeply and in detailed way, so as to know how to dismantle this war economy that involving not just the local and national actors, that involving the regional and international actors who are benefiting from the Sudanese conflict. Otherwise, we will not be able to put pressure either on the national actors or the regional actors. Such intervention should come from also, if we are planning to have de-escalation, how can we de-escalate and just only have say civilian declaration that agreeing to de-escalation? The problem is not the civilians. The problem is the military leaders, the generals who are benefiting from such conflict. The problem are the regional actors who are intervening in Sudanese conflict because they are benefiting from the status quo. Thank you.
Sorry, maybe just one more point to add, or point of clarification also. So the sort of civilian event in Berlin is just one of many events that will take place, including under the sort of Quintet architecture in terms of consultations, right? And one of the things that has been said by the Quintet is that for example, the 40 people that are attending this event are not necessarily the guardians of any conversation related to a future political process or its design, right? This is one in a series of events that will consult many people. But as to, I think it's one of the gentlemen at the back who said, you know, there are limitations to how many people can attend events, etc. And how do we build the vertical inclusion? I mean, not to put you on the spot, Dr. Baldo, but this is how you build vertical inclusion. You have people who are participating in various events. They're listening to what you're saying, your messages. They can carry them into various forums. There are several events taking place this week. It's amplifying civilian voices that will be heard in various forums. That's how you build vertical inclusion, I believe. So maybe I can just say that and put you on the spot as well.
Because Marina highlighted Sudanese being late always, I will reserve my comment to maintain German punctuality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all of you, my panelists here, and thank you all in the audience. This is just also, as Manisha said, with the conference on Wednesday, another step. So this event basically was to make Sudanese voices heard, like we already did also in September here. Hello? Shall I repeat what I said? Yeah, because you are sitting next to me. So what I said, of course, I said I really would like to thank all the panelists very, very much, and a very special thanks again to you, Manisha. You must be terribly tired, and very tiresome days are ahead of you. So thank you to the audience, thank you to all those who listen to us via internet means. This is also just one step. We tried to bring civil voices already in September. This is now another attempt. And as you heard, also the SECT initiative is not a registered trademark, a registered organization. It's just trying to reach out. There are many misunderstandings. We know that. It's a long way. And of course, we all know the longest way starts with the first step. We are aware of that, all of us, I think. Convergence means really convergence, vertical, horizontal, but on all levels. As I said in the beginning, I recently wrote a little paper looking at international actors, including international think tanks and NGOs and so on and so on. And what I found is really there is a lot of secrecy also among our circles, let's say. So it's not that everybody likes to share all information with everybody. That the transparency we are asking from the Quintet, from the Foreign Office, from whoever, is so very common in our circles, let's say. So my plea is really, if we would like to contribute to this terribly, urgently needed ceasefire and protection in Sudan, let us really be in a convergence mood, in the mood of having the unity of purpose, and please do not forget to include also the diaspora groups in your various countries, and especially also here in Germany. We have many of them here also in the room. They are most forgotten, and they also have, of course, their voice and their needs and their contributions. So that is really my plea. Also, I would like to close with another quote which I used at a different occasion already, and that is on the women. Recently, one of our renowned politicians, female politicians, she passed away, and she was a long life fighter for women's rights. Her name was Rita Süssmuth. And she once said, we made a mistake when we asked for the inclusion of women. And when you read it, I thought, oh, what? And then she said, we should have asked for 50% from the very beginning. And I cannot agree more. So there's a full week ahead of us. Tomorrow evening there's an event at Amnesty International, which also will be live streamed on Resources, Follow the Money. Suleiman will also be one of the panelists there. And there will be many more. The humanitarian part will be live streamed of the conference. And as I said, there will also be a debriefing on Thursday, among many other things. Thank you so much for your patience. I hope we all go committed for Convergence from here. And when we meet next time, maybe we can meet with better news. Thanks a lot. Go well.